Welcome to another week of Starting a Startup That Matters. Tonight we're excited to hear from an entrepreneur who led troops in battle and then went to business school. I think he got bored in business school and as a consultant decided to be an entrepreneur to get that juice flowing again. So I'll turn it over now to the CEO and founder of ID.me, Blake Hall.
Thanks, Blake. Thanks for having me. Yeah, excited to spend 20 or 30 minutes with you guys presenting our story, and then I'm going to talk with Jeff afterwards once these slides here get up. So as Jeff noted, my background, I was a third-generation soldier before I was an entrepreneur, and I led a reconnaissance platoon in combat that hunted high-value targets. So from Mosul to Baghdad, Fallujah, Karbala, been there, done that, and had a really great run. I had wonderful NCOs, and I was exposed to technology for the first time in a leadership role, and we hadn't been trained for the mission that we were doing. So traditionally, scouts and snipers aren't supposed to be detected when they go to combat. 2 weeks before we got into theater, we were given a whole bunch of whiz-bang technology systems and said, forget all of that, you're now a direct action force, you're going to be kicking down doors and going after some of the worst guys that are out there, and you've got to figure out how these systems work and develop tactics and techniques to deploy your troops. So we did that. We weren't very good when we started. Theater success rate was probably about 42% on average for missions similar to ours. First 2 months, we were around 20 to 25%. Month 3, we got up to about theater average. We took down some brigade top 10 targets. And then after that, our capture rate continued to increase over 50%, over 60%, over 70%. Eventually, our success rate was over 90% at the end of the 15-month tour, and I was leading a small JSOC task force because the tactics that we had developed were being taught throughout theater, which was really a neat experience. So our crowning achievement was we destroyed a vehicle bomb network that was killing over 1,000 people per month. We destroyed it in 2 weeks, and they'd been doing that for almost 2 years. So it was a great way to leave country, even though we couldn't control some of the strategic things that were wrong with Iraq. With what we could control, we really made a difference. And that's what really inspired me to become an entrepreneur. Maybe naively, I thought, well, if I could take a great team and figure out a problem that I had no background in, then maybe I could do something in technology that could make a difference for a community that I care about. So I went to Harvard Business School from Baghdad, which was quite the transition. 2008 to 2010, I was at HBS. Did a brief stint at McKinsey, wonderful people at McKinsey. Could have gone back there, had a full-time offer, but ultimately decided that that wasn't the place where I could make the most impact. So I thought I was pretty stupid at the time. I turned down a very lucrative offer. I lived on my rugby buddy's couch for the first 10 months of starting ID.me. It was Troop Swap at the time, and I'll go through that a little bit. And I was pretty sure I was the only homeless Harvard Business School graduate in the country. So I don't know that my judgment's been the best. I have a weird life as an entrepreneur. I met the president dressed like an Easter egg. So that happened a few months ago. I got about an hour's notice and not enough time to change. And I just looked down and I was like, oh no, this is happening. So it did, it happened. And then, from doing stuff with the President's National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace, which is why we were meeting, all the way to doing things like ticketing promotions for KISS and Def Leppard. So identity is a really cool market because it underpins so many different facets and industries, facets of our lives and industries. I got to throw out a first pitch, so I rocked some American flag pants at Nats Park to do that. But I would say, just remember the first 10 months, I was pretty sure I was going to fail and that I had just racked up a ton of debt unnecessarily. So fortunately, I got a little lucky and I had good mentors who took care of me. So this is just kind of my background at a glance. And have been fortunate to have a great team around me at ID.me over the last 5 years since business school. And we've really come a long way. So I'll talk a little bit about where we are now, and then I'll walk through how we started in this market. Today, ID.me is one of 3 companies in the United States. The other 2 are Symantec and Verizon that's certified to provide a single sign-on that acts like a digital ID card for American citizens. And the premise is that instead of having to go to the IRS and Social Security, State Department to renew a passport online and so forth, and to create email, password, PIN with each one of them, go through a question and answer process for questions and knowledge that's been compromised by identity thieves, which is kind of a miserable status quo, that you could actually log in with a credential that you already have. You only have to go through that process once, and then you could use it in a portable way, and eventually to even use banking credentials. So maybe you log into the IRS with your Citibank, with your Bank of America account, your Wells Fargo account. So that's what we do right now. Of those three companies, the government awarded a contract for a program called Connect.gov. So it's sort of a hub and spoke model. Agencies will have one place to plug into to consume identity, and identity providers will have one place to plug into to federate their logins to different government websites. Right, so Symantec was left off that award. It was just IDMe and Verizon that were awarded that. And recently, Verizon lost their accreditation briefly because they had some policies and controls that weren't aligned right. So we are sort of the only identity provider in good standing among some pretty stiff competition. The way that we started, so when I first started, and the reason some of these things, like most veteran-friendly small business in America and things like that, notice that the military community had a lot of folks who wanted to help them, organizations, people, but the way that individuals had to redeem their benefits was really broken. We saw like Microsoft trying to give away free e-learning vouchers to veterans, but the veteran had to go in person to a Department of Labor office with a DD-214, which is their social security number. It has their signature on the front, every piece of information that an identity thief would need to steal their identity. And they were encouraged to take that out of their house to transport it, because if they lose it, if the vendor or the government agency that's storing it has a break-in or just a bad employee who takes advantage of all of that data, veterans are twice as likely to have their identity compromised. Plus, it's pretty miserable to have to claim an e-learning voucher by taking the metro to a Department of Labor office in order to pick it up. So I started talking to the marketing manager, and I said, well, why aren't you delivering these benefits online? And those marketing managers at Microsoft and a few other places said, well, we'd love to. We don't have a way to verify if an individual is in fact a member of the military. There's no way to check a physical ID card online. I can't do this for military. I can't do it for students. I can't do it for corporate employees. I can't do it for senior citizens. You name it, right? There just isn't a system that's available. So that was a really, really big learning point in our development. And I will get to why that's so important here in a moment. So to step back, to look at digital identity, you probably take your driver's license and your passport for granted, all the different things that you can do with them. You can get on an airplane with your driver's license. You can show that you're over 21 when you're going out to a bar. You can check into a hotel if somebody wants to make sure that a payment instrument belongs to you. If you're checking in at the hospital over here, you use your driver's license, right? Digital identity doesn't work that way because driver's licenses and passports have not been digitized. And there's a huge void that's left. I've talked to enough DMV commissioners who've said, I'm not in the identity business. I'm in the identity business by accident and because people chose to take a credential that was intended for a different purpose and they've used it for identity. But they said, what I do is I certify that people can operate a motor vehicle. Now there's a few DMV commissioners who don't believe that, but the majority of them actually take that view. They go, my mandate is to certify that people can drive. It's not to be an ID card. And so the problem is, my response to that usually is, somebody better tell the TSA, because I'm pretty sure I used your credential to get on an airplane and used it for a purpose that you didn't intend. But same thing, State Department's going to tell you, hey, I issue passports to help people get into other countries, right, and back home. And that's what I do. So nobody's actually taking responsibility for the fact that American citizens use driver's licenses for many other things other than to operate a motor vehicle. So what you're left with is a status quo where your most trusted logins, usually with your financial institutions, are not portable, right? You can't take your Bank of America account, log into a government website. You can't, prove your identity on Airbnb, for instance, as a landlord or a tenant with your financial institution account. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got Facebook Connect and Google. So your most portable logins aren't trusted. You certainly couldn't go access your tax transcripts from the IRS with Facebook Connect, right? So into that void is where IDMe has now built a platform that can federate trusted credentials. So we have USA, for example, federating their logins, where anywhere that IDMe is integrated, you can use a USA login at a very high level of trust to prove who you are. And then we can actually take Facebook Connect or Google, and even with that first step of authentication, we'd insert a privacy blind. So Facebook Connect knows that you hit ID.me, but they have no idea which spoke off of ID.me's hub that you actually went to, so they can't sort of track you. We can wrap it with strong identity proofing, add additional factors of authentication that are universal, and then that Facebook plus multi-factor authentication effectively becomes your digital ID card, right? So that's super exciting, but it almost begs the question, how do you get started, right? Because for identity, there are two main stakeholders. You have organizations that need to consume identity, and then you've got users. And so an organization that wants to consume identity is going to say, how many users do you have in the beginning, right? Users are going to say, why should I take the time to get credentialed, right? I know I go to the DMV, I want to operate a motor vehicle. That's a pretty strong incentive, even though I hate coming here. But for you, why would I take the time to sign up for your website, let alone to provide my social security number or to enroll? And so there's a really hard problem. How do you recreate incentives? And so we had no background in identity. My co-founder, Matt Thompson, and I, also a military guy. And what we noticed, and there were a series of learnings, I won't go back to the very beginning just because we're constrained for time, but what we noticed was that military folks were treated differently and that digital IDs for those individuals didn't exist. So we went out to, I'm going to advance a little bit. We went out to some brands, and Under Armour in particular was the first big brand that took a bet on us, and we said, look, digital IDs for these market segments that you want to reach don't exist. And there's two ways the world can work. We can go get the data to verify these attributes, students, military, et cetera. But once we get it, you can either do this in a white label fashion, but then you're going to have to verify 100% of every single member of every group that you want to treat differently on your own website. That's going to be a ton of friction. Moreover, those statuses change. Students graduate, they drop out. Active duty folks become veterans, and if they're treated differently, you'd have to track that. And you're kind of creating a miserable ecosystem for users because they're going to have to re-verify or send information every single time they interact with a new brand. We said a more efficient model would be to do a PayPal-style approach, but for identity. So instead of having to verify over and over again, you verify one time on any site that uses ID.me's technology. You bind that attribute, and you can bind it to a social login, whatever your identity provider of choice is through ID.me, and then you never have to verify again. So if you've been verified in Under Armour, and this is an actual flow in Under Armour's checkout flow, you could go over to the NFLshop.com, which also has our technology in their cart, and you could use it at the NFL shop. You could use it at Cedar Fair, Starbucks, Coca-Cola, Hershey's, Overstock, all companies that use our technology. We have over 300 major brands. And so it was very much a first mover play, sort of like what Uber is doing in the taxi cab space. They figured out market entry strategy with black cars, creates network density, and then they were able to kind of pile on these features like hailing a cab through a mobile app that a lot of entrepreneurs kind of knew was a great idea. They just didn't know how to get to it. So for us, we started with military, and then students was the second population we went to, because military and students, probably 70–80% of retailers have a program for one of those two groups. Once we built the network, and that took a long time, right? So some of the carrots we used were marketing assets. Our relationship with USA was very helpful, and we said, hey, how can we sweeten this deal? We're a network effects proposition with no network effects. Marketers care about sales, right? So we really understood our customers, and we said, we understand we're early. We understand that you guys are taking a bet on us. We're going to sweeten the pot with things that are important to you. And I know, for instance, that PayPal did the same thing when they were young. They paid like $4 million to AOL to have PayPal integrated when they were trying to build network effects. Now, of course, they would never do that today because they have scale, but they had to find a way to sweeten the pot to get people to adopt them. And so for us, it was marketing assets to help drive sales, because that's how our customers were measured within their companies and rewarded according to their incentive plan. So we were very successful at getting this adopted. Now that we have the brands, we're able to go to networks, or to membership groups rather, and say, hey, one integration into us now, and you can immediately have your membership group IDs on over 300 major brands and over 700 brands total, right? And in fact, we've done that. So a membership group of 39 million users, we've become their identity platform, and that's going to be public here in several weeks. So now we're building huge density on the user side. We're upselling all of our existing merchants. We've never lost a major account. We have negative churn. So as we add more attributes and more groups, we upsell. And then because our credentials are also portable to the government, we're recreating an ecosystem where digital IDs are just as portable as a driver's license is, right? So if you're a military service member, you can use our credentials to do low-level authentication. You know, with Major League Baseball, if you want to get access to tickets, you can take that same credential and go over to the VA, and instead of having to create your identity 9 different times, which is what you have to do today, you'll be able to use that same credential. And so those government integrations are underway right now. It'd be similar for folks who have Social Security, right? So there's different discount programs that are available for them. They can take the same credential that they're using for Social Security and they can go over. We've built our network for choice. So I'm a big believer that you can't have the hub become a surveillance tool, right? And one of our biggest fears was, even if you succeed, the worst thing that could happen is 2-3 years from now, the NSA comes and says, thank you very much for building this wonderful tool. Here's a gag order. Give us admin access, right? So we've deliberately architected the hub so that it doesn't actually store PII. We use hashing instead of encryption for the hub, so we don't actually know who the identities are. And then we've built in the option for external identity providers like banks to actually own the relationship directly with the customer. So we're more like Visa or MasterCard for identity than we are trying to sort of build one ID to rule them all, which would be really, really Orwellian and creepy, and is not the sort of world that I want to live in. So recently, when we first started, we were very careful to keep marketing out of the verification flows, right? The worst thing that we thought could happen was we signed somebody up for Under Armour, and then we accidentally send a Nike email to that individual, and then Under Armour would be ticked. And as you add more brands, that would become really, really hard to track. Like, did this person sign up in Starbucks? Okay, so we can never send a coffee bean and tea leaf. All these email rules, that's just not tenable. But now that our network is actually really big, we've gone back to partners and we go, you know what, who cares? Maybe you will sign up a very small percentage of users that will get an email for your competitor. But you're so small relative to the size of the network now, it really doesn't matter. So even if Nike or Under Armour represent 3 to 4% of signups, the value that you get by allowing us to get the other 97% from non-competitive brands and then to promote your offer out to that community, you're actually gaining a lot more than whatever conflict you're creating through that channel. And that's work. So if you just look at our monthly user growth, we're closing bigger accounts, we're closing them faster. We sign up 3,000 to 5,000 users per day on average without spending any money on advertising. We signed up over 7,000 yesterday. And as more sort of large brands come on board, we now have sort of Gartner case studies and everything else where we're closing folks that can drive a tremendous amount of volume for us, in addition to the membership groups. So that's sort of how we got started. The government piece is the next big one, because that's where you create really trusted sort of legal identities. Once you have a huge pool of user-controlled legal identities, you can make digital identity work the same way that physical identity works. So instead of having to go to a bank and to answer tons of questions and use your Social Security number to sign up for accounts, you can actually sign up with a credential that you already have. For the sharing economy, for payments. Payments is really the killer app that lives on top of identity. So I'm personally very excited because this is a market that's characterized by 1 or 2 dominant networks, just like payments is, Visa or MasterCard. And then you might have some vertical networks for maybe healthcare and things like that, just like you have American Express in payments that took the affluent part of the market, and then Discover as well. So without that, I'll just say that the biggest thing, I've heard founders only fail for 2 reasons. They either run out of money or they quit. And certainly, I was an infantry guy, right? I knew nothing about technology other than what I'd learned in Iraq. But I kept learning from failure. My team kept learning from failure. And we always iterated down to what the root problem was. So we went through a lot of missteps. Jeff watched us go through a lot of missteps. I mean, business model mistakes, everything else. But we learned, we communicated to our investors why we were changing direction, and they always stood by us. And now we're in an incredible spot. in terms of our growth and in terms of the potential in front of us, because we weren't so bullheaded to stick to what we thought the problem was. We actually looked at what the data was telling us, and then we were able to communicate out to our investors, and they continue to give us enough runway to iterate the business model into something special. So I love that quote from Will Smith. If you haven't seen that before, that gets me fired up. That's sort of how I think about business. All right.